I'd like to talk about what it means to be alive. Like right now, as I'm sitting here, what does it mean for me to be alive? And that can apply to anybody at any time. I mean, you could be lying in bed or having a cup of tea in the morning or taking a walk or sitting in the afternoon or even driving in the car, etc. So whether I'm talking about just one day or every day throughout your life, what does it mean to be alive? And really, in another way, what is actually taking place as you're living? What's the essential thing that's taking place as a human being is living? Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that we're being. Each person has a sense of being. So you might say from within oneself, and I'm saying within oneself because we have an outside world, so therefore I'm just saying that we've got an inside world. I don't mean that literally, that you can say there's an inside. I mean, we know we dream and have a psyche and we think our thoughts in our consciousness. But anyway, I'll just say that on the outside you could call that in many ways existence, that we're existing along with nature and the cosmos and other people. So we're in existence, but we're human beings. That means we're being. So that being, that sense of being, is what is referred to as soul, essence, a sense or feeling of oneself, a quality of knowing yourself as a being, as a person. So then we could say that we're each personalities. Now, personality would relate to the psyche, which is the soul. And in the psyche, or by extension consciousness, which I think is integral to the psyche, because the consciousness is fundamentally a psychic activity of thought, and I believe that thought is integral to the psyche, and that the psyche exists in its own dimension apart from the physical body or the physical world. So we know each other as persons. We know that we each have a different kind of personality. And so in relationship, as you grow up, you respect the fact that people are different from you, generally speaking. And you can identify the other person as being different from you, and yet in some essential way, you're both human beings. So what I would say is, we're both selves, expressing ourselves in our personality. So you could say the personality or the persona is what we wear in the world around us to identify and recognize each other. So if I go to school, I come home and I relate to my mother. I know who my mother is, etc. But before I came home from school, she is herself. She's herself. She's not just simply the mother, which is the identity or the personality, but she's herself. And in a sense, within herself, she has a private sense of herself which I don't know about. So if you take something like psychoanalysis, which is based on the psychology of the unconscious, that means when Freud and Jung developed psychoanalysis, they created a situation, a therapeutic situation, where you analyze the other person and you expect that other person to tell you their dreams, their secrets, all about their behavior, positive and negative, their sexual history, everything that's so-called private to them, their soul, they're confiding in another person. Well, I'm absolutely against that. I think that is a profound disrespect of other people, and to allow another person to intrude into your private world, I think that is wrong. I think that's incorrect. That doesn't mean to say two friends or two people that are intimate together don't get to know each other in a very private way. But I think for society to set up institutions where they literally intrude into your private life, I think that's wrong. I think that's incorrect. Because the therapist is really an analyst, is being very clinical and is not on the same level. So in a sense, they're not two friends, two intimate people, but it's a constructed situation. And when you go into therapy, you're submitting to that particular context, that particular regime. So in a sense, you're giving yourself over to someone that's in a sense taking control, because you're the patient and they're the therapist, so they're actually taking control. And you're telling your story and they're not telling their story. It's one-sided. They may share things, but fundamentally it's one-sided. So in a way, you go in there to conform to a particular technique, because different psychoanalysts have different techniques. They're from different schools of thought. It's the same way when you go to spiritual teachers, they each have their own technique. Which I think there's a similarity between therapists and spiritual teachers. And again, you're submitting to somebody, and in a sense you're giving your money, you're giving your time, you're giving your in a sense your life, your personality, your freedom, your autonomy. In a way, you're losing your autonomy in that situation. You're losing your independence of thought. You're submitting to suggestion, persuasion, to another person's thought process, because each analyst and spiritual teacher have their own thought process, their own memory, their own form of manipulation. And so it would be a relationship of manipulation and indoctrination into whatever the therapy or teaching is all about. And I'm saying that each person should be independent and not form a relationship, and yet unless it's something in which two people share on the same level. So they're equal. Nobody is in control. Nobody's manipulating. Nobody's, in a sense, implicitly imposing their conclusions and their theories and their beliefs onto another person. It's the same way if you have children, they're private people, they're private selves, they have their own integrity, their own inner life, which belongs to them alone. So it's very, very delicate how you condition a child and how you form that personality. And of course, that in the world around the child, their environment, their society, of course they're going to be conditioned consciously and unconsciously. So that I went to a Christian primary school and we had religious instruction, but my family never belonged to a church. But that religious instruction obviously in some way must have influenced me in some way, influenced the way I think about the world, the way I respond to the world, even though I wasn't consciously aware of that indoctrination as I grew up. So the religious instruction was Christian. It wasn't about other religions. It was a specific intention in English schools to conform to the Anglican or Protestant ethics. So again, someone's telling you what to think. However so-called free the school is in England. I mean, it's quite a free, liberated society, but there's all levels of conditioning going on and propaganda. So I think it's a respect for each self, their autonomy and independence, and that there is a private sense of personality, a private sense of soul, if you like. And so, unless that person opens up to another person, then I think that one ought to leave people alone. But of course, politically, religiously, socially, individually, people want to change other people, make other people like them, in the family or in a social group. And I think that kind of power play is really built into our way of relating to each other. So if I go out for a walk, or I go into town and see people, just seeing people, not talking to them, just seeing them, you can see that people are very, very individual. And you can see their behaviour. They might be talking to each other, walking around with their dogs, with their children. So you observe a lot, and you go to the shop, and of course people are talking at various, so you see people. So how do I see other people? What's my awareness of them? What's my thought about them as I'm living? Well, first of all, I see everybody within the human condition. So we're all in the human condition. We're all conditioned by that human condition in various ways, wherever we live. So, whatever type of person I see, if they appear to be a different country, they appear to be different character, different personality, etc. In my own mind, I allow everybody to be themselves. So when I go out, I never think, oh, this is the world, and I'm imposing myself on that world, for example. In the same way, I mean, in the past, I've gone to lectures, I've gone to small groups of people involved in religion and various other things. And if I go into a group, just to a meeting or something, I don't go in with any sense of revealing anything about myself, or that I expect anyone to behave differently than they are. So I prefer to see people as they are. I don't think that I look at the world in an ideal way, whether it's spiritual, social, psychological, emotional. I don't see the world as an ideal. Now, I'm not saying that people shouldn't be idealistic in politics and other things, if that's the way they carry through certain actions and ideas in the world. So I respect institutions of any kind, in the sense that those people have the right to be themselves and to live out and express what they feel about life. I can criticize people, as I say, people that indoctrinate, manipulate, etc. But when I see or think about the world and its institutions and power structures, my awareness of that isn't from a psychological point of view. I don't think, oh, those people are manipulating, or those people are out for influence and money, etc., etc. I don't actually, that is not the way I actually think about it. That's not my actual attitude. So even though I can, in a relative way, critique and question things, I don't actually think of other people as manipulative, suspicious, domineering, this or that. I never think like that. People are doing what they're doing. And I don't have the answer to the world's problems. on any level, spiritual at any level. So I mustn't assume that people don't know what they're doing in physics or in politics and even in therapy. I mean, people have dedicated their lives to different systems of thought and different ideals and stuff like that. And I think good luck to people if they're working to do things in the world. And in human nature, you'll get contradiction, conflict, violence, etc. And that's all part of the fabric of the human condition. So again, although I can get information about the Middle East and all the conflict, if I get that information, it's simply information. So I can remember what information I've been given, but quite frankly, that doesn't become political in the sense that I think I should act on that information. So in a way, I don't internalize what other people are doing. If people are killing each other in the Middle East, and there's diplomats and rivalry between countries, etc., that's their affair. That's what other people are doing. I'm just getting the information, and because I'm not political, I'm not religious, etc., then it's simply information. As a human being, I don't need the world to tell me how to behave. I don't need information to tell me how to live. So I simply don't internalize what the media say. So when I went across Europe and across Turkey and Iran and Afghanistan to India, when I went, I had no information about where I was going. So I literally went from country to country without knowing anything about the political situation, anything about social behaviour and culture and customs or anything like that. It wouldn't even have crossed my mind to think, oh, I'm going to India, I'm going to the Himalayas, what kind of wild animals are there? Are there dangerous animals? It didn't even occur to me to get any information whatsoever about anything. So when I went to the Himalayas, I was wandering around the Himalayas, nobody told me about the wildlife, and there probably were dangerous things there, but it's not the way I look at the world. Or let's put it that way, at that time it wasn't the way I looked at the world. For example, I wouldn't want to go to a country and put myself in a dangerous situation with wildlife. In fact, if I went to, say, Africa, I'm not particularly interested in what other people do regarding the wildlife. I wouldn't necessarily go out of my way to see anything, because that's not the way I look at nature. If I went to Africa and I was living in an area and I took a daily walk, then I see what I see. But I wouldn't necessarily go anywhere else to specifically see anything. So I don't watch television anyway, but when I have been in a situation watching television, I wouldn't watch anything on nature or on the radio. I never listen to anything to do with nature, because I just want to see nature in an ordinary way, on an everyday level, like taking a walk. I don't want to see exotic things. I don't want to see dangerous snakes or this, that and the other. I just see what I see. I mean, when I came back from America in '69, I came to a small market town near Oxford. My mother had a boarding house and I stayed there. And I really hadn't read any spiritual books. And I just went to the local library, a small library, and went to, you know, where they've got religious, spiritual books, etc. And they happen to have very good books, very interesting books. And I didn't know what I was looking for. I didn't have any idea what to look for. But I found some very interesting books in just this small library. And that's how I've always been. I mean, when I was interested in reading a book, I'd go to the library and I just read what was there. And about 15 years ago, when I came into this house and I was building a library and to do research, I just went around to the local shops and just picked up books that were in these shops. But I didn't go looking for anything special. I didn't have an idea, oh, I want this kind of book, that kind of book. I just found the books that I wanted to buy that happened to be in the shop. So all my books come from this small town, which was basically a market town where I'm living now. I mean, it's quite big, but it's still a market town, a country town. So what I'm saying is, throughout my life, I've tended to live spontaneously, and if I'm in a city like London, and I live right in the centre of London, where Houses of Parliament and Buckingham Palace and right in the centre, I mean, I used to go to the various parks. I'd walk through the parks and walk around the streets, and I didn't make a fuss that I wasn't in nature. I didn't miss nature. I just walked around the parks. I didn't have an image of what nature is. You know, I mean, there are people that in Scotland, in the British Isles, there are people that want to bring the wolf. They want to bring the wolf back into Scotland. I think they've actually done that. Now, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with any, how can I say? I think nature is nature. And I don't think, personally speaking, I don't think people should interfere with nature, for better or for worse. So people protect animals and they do this and they do that. I'm not saying if I'm walking by the river and I see an animal that needs help, then I'll help it. But I don't feel responsible for nature. I don't feel protective about nature. So if things become extinct or there's climate change, etc., etc., for various reasons. So although I'm vegetarian, vegan, as it were, and I do that because I don't want to be, I don't think people should necessarily kill animals, but I'm not against people that eat meat, and it's not a principle that I feel moral about. And so, again, people making a fuss over nature, people trying to change nature, manipulate nature. All of that, I'm not in agreement with any of that. Because I think the natural condition is the natural condition. And that includes the weather, the seasons, whatever's happening, positive or negative. And I'm afraid I see human nature in the same way. When I was growing up, a couple of people I was friendly with that lived next door to me, they liked to fight. They liked to fight each other. And if I was with somebody, with a friend walking around in Oxford, he would deliberately knock into another boy looking for a fight. Well, I didn't tell him what to do. I didn't tell him not to do that. I mean, I might have said, I might have shown that I wasn't in agreement with that, but I never imposed my idea of how he should behave. And I've more or less followed that line all my life, the idea of telling other people how to behave. So what I'm saying is, people, the world we live in is nothing but society, its institutions, its whole social awareness, psychological awareness, political awareness, religious awareness, is telling other people what to do. Whether it's the law, the government, the judges, the prisons, they're all telling other people what to do. Some people are dysfunctional. Some people are more aggressive. Some people are criminal, etc., etc. Do I want to spend my life locking people up, killing people, or guarding people? Do I want to spend my life like that? No, I don't. So what does that mean? It would mean that not necessarily anarchy, because that's what people think of. There's no law and order, there'd be anarchy. Even in Aboriginal society, very simple society, quite simple. Of course, there's rules and regulations, but nonetheless, now and then, tribes will kill each other. So if you take a 5-year period where there's relative peace and people behave themselves, and the young men, they might fight amongst each other and bits and pieces, and then suddenly there's a tribal war, and say 5,000 people get killed or something, and you think that people are behaving themselves for 5 years, and then they destroy that by going out and having a big war. So you think of people going around in England, for example, like criminals stealing things and locking all these people up for stealing things or violence and things like that. And yet soldiers will go into the Middle East and kill lots of people and get killed themselves. So you might say in a place like England, they're locking all these people up for petty crimes and bits and pieces, and yet they're sending young men to be killed and to kill other young men from other countries. It just doesn't make sense. So you've got a few teenagers in London, you might have a few people stabbing each other with knives, say, you know, now and then you'll get a killing, once in a while you'll get a killing. And yet you've got all these soldiers going out and being killed and killed in all parts of the world, in other countries where they don't even belong. They don't even belong in those other countries. And yet they're locking the people up here for killing each other or whatever, and have a policy of actually legally being able to go to another country and kill people or be killed. It's the same way in the Inquisition. You know, you've got these the Catholic Church, and you know, imposing morality on everybody. You know, we'll kill you if you don't go to church on Sunday, that kind of thing, and believe in Jesus, he loved everybody and all of that. And yet in the Inquisition they were torturing people that said things that went against the church or something. So the hypocrisy is again inbuilt into the world, and the way men manipulate women, and the way women allow men to manipulate them. The whole sexual ritual. Another thing is that in the kind of religious spiritual world, as it were, and the psychic mediumistic world, that kind of world that I've lived in and studied and met people from all over, there's this idea of psychic power. And I'm saying in therapy, that's psychic power. The police, it's psychic power. In schools, it's psychic power. A power play, power politics, all of that. But what I'm getting at is this idea, it goes back probably to Aboriginal times, where you've got the shaman or the witch doctor that, say for example in Africa, I've heard stories where if a boy's going along and has an accident and dies, then the witch doctor will assume that it was a curse by somebody. So he talks to people in the community, and he's looking for signs that tell him who put a curse on that boy. And of course the witch doctor also can put a curse on somebody. So that means that idea of curse is that one mind can curse another mind. So in Africa people will be afraid of the witch doctor because the witch doctor could put a spell on them. So that means they might dream of something, they might have accidents, they might be in fear of their life, etc., etc. And that goes on all over the world. I mean, even in Europe, until quite recently, that kind of thing, and probably still goes on to some degree. I would say there's no such thing. I would say that there is no such thing as one mind being able to influence another mind like that. I'm not talking about conversation in therapy. I'm not talking about the police, you might say, manipulating other people. I'm saying psychic power in that sense of manipulating people, controlling people, telling people how to behave, all of that. But I'm just saying on this other level of a more internal kind of psychic power, and this idea of the devil and being possessed by evil and all that kind of talk. I think that evil is a term that we apply to people that either we don't like their behaviour, like Hitler, we don't like his behaviour. But I don't believe that Hitler's possessed by evil or the devil. I don't think there is such a psychic entity that can possess you or possess anybody, or that any, you might say, psychic, shaman, religious person, whatever, has any psychic power over another person. I think that's actually false. And that tradition of people wanting to believe that there is this, you can put a spell on someone, you can get inside someone's mind and get inside someone's psyche. I think that's false. That doesn't mean to say that there's not some form of telepathy and that kind of thing, that you can share thoughts or something like that. But as I say, I don't think that anyone in a psychic sense can control anybody else's mind from the inside. And it's all based on fear, because if you grow up, if you're a young person, you grow up in an African village, then you'll grow up with the fear that people can put a spell on you. If you're brought up in, say, London, you know nothing about tribal customs, that wouldn't even come into your mind. So, I mean, until I read books on, let's say, magic in my 30s, maybe 30s, I didn't know anything about that kind of thing. It would never have come into my mind that anyone has any power over me or anyone could come into my mind. It's ridiculous. It'd be absolutely ridiculous. But when I got involved with magic and I was studying magic and I met people in Oxford that were well into magic, I noticed that the people that were well into magic, they did manipulate people. They were the kind of people that manipulate people. And I found that in the spiritualist church, the mediums, they're definitely people that enjoy manipulating people and making people afraid and making people insecure psychologically, emotionally. And they feed on insecure people that go to them. So yes, they're looking for victims. They're looking for people that have insecurity and fear. That's the only thing they can feed on, those type of people. It's the same with exorcism. There's no such thing as exorcism. I mean, in my house here, I literally have hundreds of apparitions, entities walking around. I've never felt afraid. I've never felt threatened. by any of it. And I've seen demonic stuff, I've seen very angelic stuff. I've seen so much, hundreds, over years. It's never bothered me because I have no superstition. And I'm saying superstition in that it's false. No entity can harm you. No entity in your psyche can harm you. No thought can harm you. None of that can harm you. Yes, on the outside, people can manipulate you, and as I say, males can seduce females, etc., and people can manipulate children and brainwash children, etc. Yes, on the outside, but on the inside, absolutely not. So to me, evil is simply what we don't like in other people. But there's no such thing as evil on its own, in the world, the devil, or floating about the world or something. No, it's simply that if you feel that you hate somebody, or you think Hitler's evil, or it's evil to do this or to do that, then that's your idea of it, that's your belief in it. But it's nothing more than that. So inside a person, there's no evil. There's no such thing as evil in their psyche, in their body, in their inheritance. No, that whatever makes them aggressive, that's simply aggression. If you're aggressive and you enjoy or want to be aggressive and you seek power in a religious institution, as a spiritual teacher, as a shaman, as a witch doctor, as a medium, whatever, you enjoy the power. As I say, I'm afraid of heights. I don't know why. I've always been afraid of heights. So what? It doesn't bother me at all to have fear. And I'm afraid of having an out-of-the-body experience, which a lot of people find easy. It doesn't bother them, but it bothers me. And I respect that. I respect who I am and what I am. And if I had a child and they didn't want to go somewhere and they really didn't want to go to school or do this, I wouldn't send them. If I knew that psychologically inside them they didn't want to do something, then they wouldn't have to do it, whatever that is. Not conform to society, conform to the police, or conform to government, conform to religious structures and so-called education, etc., etc. So people caring for children, and it's easy to send them to school and not think about it. It's easy to send them off to war and not think about it. Send them off to college and university. It's all set up. And who set those places up? What's the intention, the motive in the way we educate people and we run our society? whether it's an Aboriginal culture that feeds on fear and superstition in many respects. But of course that superstition is going on in Europe as well. If you think, well, a tradition in India where people so-called spiritual religious people develop psychic powers, what they call siddhis. And they have these psychic powers, and it's part of yoga and all that kind of thing. You read that in Tibetan Buddhism, in Hinduism and all of that. And I mean, someone like Krishnamurti, I heard a video, he's talking about it. And when he was talking about it, he was saying that these people that become spiritual teachers and they got these psychic powers and they can use them for negative things and evil things. Now, he believes in evil. I don't believe in that. I don't think. I think people can manipulate people psychologically, but I don't think anybody's psychic abilities, psychic powers, can be used other than in an outward way of manipulating people's personality and their minds when they go into their ashrams or they go into their cults and whatever they are. And another thing Krishnamurti said to reveal some of his ideas is that he was talking to Professor David Bohm, and he said the world we live in, the atmosphere of the world around us, in buildings, in the countryside, he said it's saturated with good and evil. He believes that the whole atmosphere, whatever you want to call that atmosphere, psychic atmosphere, whatever you want to call it, he said that the atmosphere in the world itself is saturated in good and evil, which is nonsense, absolute nonsense. And one time when he was in Delhi, as a young man, a fairly young man, and he was becoming a teacher, he had people worshipped him in India, thought he was a holy man and all of that. And he said that he did a lot of healing, and he said he's got these psychic powers. Now, he was with these two young women, staying with them, and they were quite involved in politics in Delhi. And he's in their house, and he takes the candle and goes around from room to room and comes back to them. He says, "Oh, I've just freed the house of evil." Now, why would he do that in someone's house, two young ladies, and do a thing like that? That seems to me totally abnormal for anyone to do anything like that. And the fact that he believed in the evil, he believed in exorcism, that he actually believed that, shows that he's of that tradition. He said he's not religious, he doesn't believe in any form of superstition, but that's absolute superstition. Saying that means objectively in the world, and this is a religious belief right across the world, in the world there are evil powers. So in Christianity, Satan, the devil, is the prince of this world, and he has power over this world. So literally this entity can come into your psyche, into your mind, into the physical world, in the psychic atmosphere, and possess you. And demons and things can possess you. That's all false. When you go to bed and you can dream about anything. When you wake up, it's over. Children have nightmares. They wake up and it's over. Even Carl Jung, in his psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, he developed a thing called active imagination, and he taught it to his therapists. And what he did was he would sit and have an image he'd just have this image, he'd have this visualization, and as he focused on it, he could use that to go into his psyche, leave his body, go into his psyche, and meet all these entities. And over a 20-year period, he wrote a book called The Red Book, which is filled with his paintings and his stories about meeting all these entities. And he said that he thought some of these entities were real, that they actually lived in the psyche, just like we live in the physical world. They actually live in the psyche. And he certainly believed in good and evil. I mean, he was brought up as the son of a priest or a vicar. And he absolutely believed in good and evil. And in fact, he said his mission on this earth, that he was carrying out the will of God, and his mission was to investigate evil. Whereas I'm saying there's no such thing as evil other than something you don't like in the world. That's all. It's an idea in your mind that you think somebody that, like a serial killer or Hitler, they're evil people. But that's simply your idea that there's something that other people do you don't like and you call it evil. It's just a name. But I'm saying there's no such thing as evil other than that you hate what people do, or you don't like what people do, and you say they're evil people. And I mean, you can say that within your family, you could say that within your community, you could say that within the government, within anyone can say that, but it's simply a description of somebody doing something you don't like. But apart from that, in your own mind, in your own soul, in your own personality, in the world around you, there's no such thing as evil. There's no such thing as good. But Krishnamurti believed that there was, that the evil and good were psychic realities. And that level of superstition, that level of, you might say, power over people that believe in that, like the witch doctor, the spiritual teacher, the yogi, and people like Krishnamurti. And I believe there's an undertone in his character, in his personality, where I believe one of his techniques when he speaks to people is to try and frighten them. The way he can make people vulnerable when he talks to them in his conferences, when he used to talk to them, and I went to many of those things, that he tried to induce a vulnerable, sensitive, frightened, insecure human being. He's creating around him an atmosphere of profound insecurity, so that in that insecurity, in that fear, as he's talking to them, just like an analyst, exactly the same, or a witch doctor, as he's making people talking to them, making them more and more insecure, because they've gone to him for advice. People go to his conferences for spiritual guidance. And I'm saying that when he's talking, and this was all through his life, it's a technique, it's a you might say a psychic technique, that he would make people vulnerable and say how bad the world is, how corrupt the government is, how evil the world is around them, and they've come to him to get help. And he's saying that he's making them feel vulnerable, insecure, frightened, so they will believe in him. And that's the way he gets people to follow him. That's the way he gets power over people, so that he can set up his institutions and they can have this powerful influence over all these people. And it is actually a psychic power. That's my view. And I believe probably most of these people, if not all, that have come from the East, have brought over this belief in psychic power. And it's still going on all over the world in the third world. They all believe that. All these native people, they all believe that. You know, as I say, apart from phobias like fear of heights, I mean, I'm not afraid of anything. I mean, fear just doesn't occur to me. And to use fear in relationship to frighten a child is very, very typical. People do that. When you go to school, when I used to go to school, they would punish you for the slightest thing. They'd hit you, hurt you, weaken you, make you vulnerable. Probably the worst thing I can think of is that the indoctrination that other human beings can have psychic power over you. And certainly I know a lot of people are attracted to that, who go into magic and go into Eastern religion and shamanism. As I say, in Oxford, I met people that you meet them and you know they're trying to manipulate the people around them. And I just kept away from those people. I immediately saw that, because I know when I grew up I could see it in my friends, how they manipulated each other and wanted sexual power or physical power or emotional power. You could see it. And they're the people that were successful. They did get the girls, they did find success, they could manipulate society. I mean, you know, the whole concept in the 60s, drugs, sex and rock and roll. I mean, that's what it's all about. And they were all into drugs and, you know, Maharishi Yogi and power and manipulating people. All their lyrics in their songs were like devil worship and all this kind of stuff. And it's still going on today, very, very satanic. And it's all phony, it's all false and phony. All that's satanic are the people manipulating other people. The only people, you know, the only fear is fear of those people that are going around manipulating people. That's the only fear to worry about. You know, you get these cults and they get young children. It's the same thing when you get these child soldiers in Africa. It's the same thing, just brainwashing, so they can manipulate them and they can sacrifice them on the battlefield. It's what happens in England in private schools, public schools. I mean, they go to places to be military officers, and then they control the working class. The elite class control the working class and send them off to World War I and World War II for a bloodbath. They believe in that kind of sacrifice. You know, Jesus sacrificed himself for the world, that kind of attitude. And Jesus overcame Satan, the devil. Yes, it's all right as a story. When I studied religion and magic and all of that, it's all symbolic. In the psyche, the entities, the thought forms, the apparitions I see, it's all symbolic. Literature, art, music, culture, religion is symbolic. It's not meant to be literally true. And certainly Jesus didn't literally die on the cross to save the world. I mean, that's a story. That's just a story. If he did die as a martyr on the cross, then he's an idiot. I don't think he did. I remember one time looking in my mother's purse, her bag, and I saw this little amulet of a little, I don't know, a little imp, a little devil, a little demon. And she thought, it's a little black demon, tiny little thing. And I didn't know I didn't know anything about that. But that was her private, she didn't tell me or anyone else. That was her private little belief that that would protect her or something, bring her good luck or something. I mean, I've collected quite a few amulets and things. I've had a scarab, a very ancient scarab from 3,000 years ago. But that, to me, is a symbol, is part of a religious symbol, a mythological symbol. It's not about power. I mean, on the back of the scarab, they have hieroglyphs, and it's about a prayer to the God to protect you. But I don't believe in any form of gods that protect you. My spirituality isn't about good and evil and God's protecting you or hurting you. The Lord God is going to persecute you and kill the children of Israel. All that nonsense. And it's actually quite disgusting, all of that. And no, they're just symbols. They're art objects, they're symbols, and they have a story, a mythology, a narrative, but I don't take any of that literally. None of that's literal. Yes, you can have a dream and you might have a god in it, or you might have a scarab in it or something. I've had those dreams, but they're only dreams and they're only images in your mind. So I've never treated any of the entities I've seen as real, like Jung believed they were real. I don't think they're real. They're just pictures in a book. No, I mean, forever on this planet, people have tried to terrorize other people. That's really what it's all about. Is, you know, like they say, you know, in American politics in the Middle East, you know, the war on terror, and using, you know, the idea of the crusade, going to fight the crusade. And various analogies, Christian analogies, all this kind of stuff, you know, I forget what it is, the climate of evil and all this kind of language. No, it's just people's psychology in the American government, etc., English government, whatever. They're just what you call psyching people out. They psych people out. They're simply using psychological language to manipulate and frighten the people and work on that level of fear and insecurity, and the terrorists that come to England and take over England, all that stuff. But it's to psych people out and to make people vulnerable, like Krishnamurti and these other spiritual teachers, etc. Making people vulnerable, so they give you money, they look to you for their security, the police, the military, the mediums, the spiritual teachers, etc. And they want your money, they want your property, they want your emotions, they want your soul, they want your heart, they want your life. They want your life. They want nothing less than your life. And it's all psychology. It's got nothing to do with evil or gods and power and psychic thing. Nothing to do with that. They're just petty little people, got nothing better to do than just ruin the life of everybody else. That's all they're doing. It doesn't matter who they are on the internet, and all these people that run the internet or run the governments, the business, whatever they're doing, they're petty people with unintelligent minds going around the world, whether they're charitable or whatever they are, and manipulating people and trying to frighten people, make them insecure, superstitious, and they're raking in the money, raking in the power and influence, etc., etc. And that's all it is. It's a petty mind that wants to do that. Not a creative mind, not an inspired mind, not a kind mind, generous. They're basically egotistic, narcissistic, and psychopathic types of people that do that on every level and all walks of life. And what can you do about it? It's part of human nature, it's part of our tradition, it's still going on in Aboriginal culture, so then they're not a perfect culture. People idealise Aboriginals, Native American Indians, but they're laden with superstition. So if you like myself, I'm a realist, I believe in rational thought, I don't believe in any form of superstition, but I can study mythology, I can study all of that objectively, but never take it literally. But it's so pervasive in the psychology of the human condition, there's absolutely no way you can get rid of it. If you're walking along, there's a dangerous snake, all you can do is just deviate and walk the other way. That's all you can do. If you meet a manipulative person, you see it and you just keep away. That's all I do. When I meet people like that, want to meddle with your mind, manipulate your mind, get into your head, etc., etc., create fear, vulnerability, all of that, you just see it, and you don't think I can change the world, I can reform the world, I can do this or that. No, you just move away from those. They're not worth it. You just move away. I did it as a child. I saw it immediately. And I inherited psychic abilities. I know about psychic abilities because I inherited them. That's what they do. Refugees, there's a war, they get out of the country, quite right. That's all you can do. If you're a peaceful person, and you're not a superstitious person, etc., and there's something going on, if the house is on fire, you get out. That's all you can do. Just move away, and that's all you can do. It's too deep in the psyche. The conditioning of those type of people is too deep in the psyche to do anything about. And if people like Carl Jung, who for me, in the modern period, he investigated the deepest levels of the psyche, the whole of his life. He knew all about psychic abilities, psychic power, all that stuff. And he just accepted it as part of human nature and whatever. I don't agree with his conclusions, a lot of his conclusions, but he did do very good work in mythology, no doubt about it. What he was like as a person, his personality, all of that, therapy, manipulation, all of that, that's up to him. But basically he was a very good mythologist. So this is the human condition, this is human nature, tradition, custom, ritual, and we've got to live with it. For me, just get on with your life, paint your pictures, do your research, travel the world, and don't let this other element interfere. Don't internalize it. I mean, when the Nazis in the Second World War came into Paris, Pablo Picasso was living there, he just carried on painting his pictures.